Good morning to you all. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you to this online symposium of the Maastricht Center for the Innovation of Classical Music, the MCICM. My name is Peter Peters and I am the director of the MCICM, and I also welcome you on behalf of the researchers in the center and the members of the program committee. And as some of you may know, in the center we have three partners, the Philharmonie Zuid-Nederland, or the South Netherlands Philharmonic, Maastricht University, and also Zuid University of Applied Sciences in Maastricht, mainly the conservatory and its research center. And the goal of the center is to bring together the worlds of academic research, higher music education, and the professional practice around the theme of innovation of classical music. And this goal is also reflected in the program of this year's symposium, and also in the participants who are coming from different backgrounds. We started the center in 2018, which is 4 years ago. So this is the 4th annual symposium. And 3 of them were really affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. That had, of course, great impact on the classical music sector. And recently, luckily and happily, concert halls have reopened and audiences are returning. But I think classical music organizations have become very aware of how important it is to rethink their role and their relevance in society, which is therefore also the topic of our symposium. So when we were thinking about the theme for this year's symposium, we thought of all the efforts that classical music organizations are making at the moment to make themselves relevant. So this term of relevance is really high on the agenda, relevant to a wider portion of society. And so we see institutions and musicians that seek new ways to engage with partners, with social themes and issues, and also with other types of music. And you see them relating to topics, of course, really critical issues like climate change, diversity, and education. And these topics are being dealt with in various ways. And organizations, orchestras, ensembles are opening up classical music to these new themes. And when they do so, they attempt to expand the borders of the discipline. And this term border, of course, is really interesting because on the one hand, it's about expanding the borders. And at the same time, we are also very much aware that borders are sometimes almost rigorously policed in certain circumstances. And so this whole notion of border and borderlands to us seems a good concept to talk about in this symposium. We have a quite varied program with roundtables, also parallel sessions, but we start this symposium with a roundtable on this very notion of impact. And the reason we do so was that Dutch orchestras a few months ago decided to commission a research report on basically making clear how within their organizations and they can have impact, but also impact on the outside world. So on audiences, policymakers, politics, subsidizing organizations. And what is impact? I think this is going to be discussed, but what these orchestras meant is that they have impact in several domains. Of course, music education, but also mental health and well-being. But it also ranges to contributing to the attractiveness of a city or region, or even to personal development. And so the focus is on how orchestras have impact. And then it's not only about artistic quality or reaching as many people as possible, but again, how to have meaning for people, communities, and meaning in society. So this is a topic that is going to be discussed in our upcoming roundtable, for which we have invited 4 guests who will introduce themselves shortly. But before I give the floor to Stefan Rozu, who is the director of the Philharmonie Zuid-Nederland and also the initiator of the MCICM, and he will moderate the roundtable, some practicalities. So by now, I think most of us are familiar with Zoom, and so you can switch your microphone off, and if possible, your camera on. Questions can be put in the chat, or you can use the raise hand function. And for those who are moderating or presenting during sessions, it would be good if you join the session 15 minutes in advance. We have a Symposium website that has all the sessions listed, and this is also where you can ask any questions you might have. And then maybe a final point, we have a coffee break between 2:15 and 2:45, so half an hour where you can meet other participants at the symposium. The link for that is in the overview of Zoom links at the very bottom of the first day. And the idea is you can go to that link if you want to meet other people, and we can then put you, as it said, in your own separate breakout rooms. Okay, that's all from me now. I want to thank you all for joining us, and I wish you an inspiring symposium. Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter, and good morning, everyone. Peter has already said, well, Stefan Rozu, I'm working as Intendant and CEO, Artistic Director for the Philharmonie Zuid-Nederland, and it is my task here today to moderate the first session. We have 4 interesting speakers with very, very different backgrounds who will give now every one of them in 5 minutes a first sketch glimpse of what they think is most important in their personal view as far as impact is concerned of symphonic music, classical music, orchestras and ensembles. We have said that we try to stay everyone within the 5-minute frame. Then we will have maybe a short discussion between us, but as well, you are invited to pose your questions. So as Peter said, please raise your hand and someone will see it, and that way we get the discussion started. I would like to give the word to Hannah Conway now.
Thank you very much. My name's Hannah Conway. I'm a composer, and over the past 25 years, I've been working with opera houses, orchestras and arts organisations internationally, always with very diverse communities at the heart of creating and performing. But today I really want to speak about some ideas and examples of work more broadly than just orchestras and ensembles, because I feel that certainly my experiences, we've been asking many of the same questions regarding relevance and impact for years. And I think that actually if we look beyond our own niche industry, we can find some of these answers. I'm currently director of a new company called Sound Voice. It's a company that specialises in commissioning and creating new works of art by drawing together interdisciplinary teams of collaborators. So a current project is about voice loss and identity and involves experts who have experience of voice loss in families, or because they have a professional expertise in voice cross-sector. So that includes world-renowned opera singers, biomedical researchers, groundbreaking vocal synthesis technology companies, healthcare professionals and academics, all of whom are connected to voice, and all are invited to collectively explore what it means and how it intersects with identity. And we took them through an artistic process. Nobody was expert in the room. They were all equally out of their depth. Why? Because they had to sing and make music together. They were totally unprepared for this non-hierarchical environment, but it was magic, and the space was equal, and so therefore were the connections. They imagined further, they listened more deeply, they were playful, and they grew outside of their usual boxes. I think as artists, we have a really unique ability to create spaces in which people feel heard and can express themselves. 94% of professionals involved in the project felt that their own professional practice and thinking had been acutely transformed by the project. So, for example, one of Europe's leading head and neck surgeons said, it's only through this project that actually I've really started to understand the meaning of voice and voice loss for the people that I've been trying to treat for so long. Equally, the technology companies that were involved in new commercial product innovations, and it's the first time that opera has been used in biomedical product development. Scientists reported that they thought about their science in a totally different way, and it changed the nature not only of their research, but it also made it more stronger and more likely to succeed. So we're looking at using the arts as a central catalyst for change, impacting scientific research, accelerating thinking and practice simultaneously across sectors. So artistic processes and cultural engagement can stimulate real-world change and connectivity. Another example quickly I want to give you is of first-year engineering students at the University College of London. In 1 week, they have to discover what is wrong with Watford. Now, Watford is an area of North London. They have to come up with solutions that work, and they're speaking to people that would normally be totally invisible to them, that they bypass, and they have to ask, what do people want to see change? What challenges do they face? What values do they have? What dreams are you pursuing? What does success look like to you? What works in your town? What doesn't? How much unlearning do they have to do to even see or understand that part of the city and the people that live in there? What's their unconscious bias? They have to gain insight into a community they know nothing about, using their skills, their knowledge, their humanity, and apply it to real life problems and real life people who are looking for change. Designing solutions for a city and for the people. Simple. I'd love to give that, set that challenge to 100 orchestral musicians, set them the same challenge. How good at listening would they be? How would they marry their treasured Western classical sound heritage and their technical finesse with actually what's needed? How many risks would they take? A couple of years ago, I was imposed as artistic director at Streetwise Opera. It's a company working with the homeless sector and their clients. And Streetwise, like many organisations, have developed really stringent evaluation models that strongly demonstrate the impact that arts have on individuals. Significant increase in well-being, social inclusion, increased sense of belonging, etc., etc. But I wanted to start exploring how the company might impact not just individuals, and started asking, how can the arts positively impact the homeless sector and social sector as a whole? How can we use, for example, the arts to transform the agency that people have in a space, whether that's a public space or a hospital or a concert hall? How can we shift the power dynamics and the hierarchies that exist in those spaces? How can a work of art, for example, affect the way that people move through a city or interact with one another? How can the arts, or even a single work of art, impact the way that services or environments are designed for people? For example, how could a musical engagement help a homeless outreach worker build a more meaningful relationship with their client and therefore be able to design services that are more appropriate? So how can the arts change a way a community thinks about others and the services that support them? What do you think radical reimagining looks like, and how far are we willing to go? Finally, as people who commission and create cultural experiences, I think we have to collaborate to make what I'd call transdisciplinary work. And by that, I mean work whereby all the disciplines are enriched as a result of combined thinking. Working together in this way, with the arts at the very centre, I think we can design better services, better spaces, better homes, environments, and build a more connected and interdependent society. We'll also, though, most importantly perhaps, create extraordinary cultural experiences and works of art that will inform who we are as individuals and as a society at large. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Your enthusiasm really translated even through Zoom, I have to say. And thank you very much for this first glimpse on what impact with the arts, what kind of impact the arts can have on very practical examples. I would now give the floor to Gerald Mertens. Please, Gerald.
Well, I tried to share my screen. It should work now. Can you see?
It does, yeah.
It does. Lovely. So my name is Gerald Mertens. I'm the managing director of the German Orchestra Union based in Berlin. And I'm doing this job now since almost 30 years. I want to share with you 4 observations. So 5 minutes to win it, and I try it. So the first observation throughout the pandemic, we had a great encouragement of musicians going outdoors and going into home for elderly people, going for people with handicaps, etc., etc. So we had a lovely project in Berlin. You see the hashtag Musiker für Musiker Berlin, and it worked like this. We have 7 orchestras in Berlin. We have 2 radio choirs in Berlin, and all these professionals were in lockdown. They got their normal payment, monthly payment, and they were in so-called Kurzarbeit, so short working shortage, we would say perhaps. And so they were free, and they had time to, well, what shall we do now? They decided, well, if we can do chamber music outside, and if we can do some charity work, we would love to do it. And so we organized all this chamber music ensembles from these major orchestras to go out to these homes for elderly people, etc., etc., or to perform outside. So to the pandemic restriction, of course, it was not possible inside, but they did it outside. And the tricky thing was the musicians didn't get paid, but the organizations, so the elderly people homes, etc., the social institutions, they paid a fee, and these fees were collected. And in the second row or the second run of this concert row, freelance musician performed, and the freelance musician got the fees which the other musicians didn't share from themselves. So it was quite a tricky win-win situation. The people, the handicapped people, the wheelchair people, all these guys got music performances of 30 minutes. The professional musicians from the orchestras performed for free, and the freelance musicians got a paid job in the next round. So this was a fantastic project to bring the musicians in direct contact with the audiences, with handicapped audiences in their homes. Second example, a very lovely format is one-to-one concerts. You see these 2 shares. On the one chair, there may be a cellist or violinist or whatever musician. On the other chair, one guy from the audience. So it's 1-to-1. It's not 1-to-2, it's really 1-to-1. And the musician will perform 10 minutes only, and there will be a very intense contact between the musician and the guy in the audience. And all those who participated in this concert were absolutely thrilled about this experience. Wow, this musician is performing only for me. So this is a quite new experience, even for classic lovers who sit in the big halls, having one musician performing only for them. And this is now something like a franchise, and this developed from Germany, and you can book one-to-one concerts online in New York or Rome or wherever. So this is a very successful story, how to bring out small concert formats into, open air or any other room, in small galleries, in libraries, in the concert halls, and wherever you can have a 6 meter and a space where you can put in 2 people. A third example. This is the community ensemble from the Concerthaus Dortmund. And within the Concerthaus Dortmund, there is Matthew Robinson, which is the one and only community musician in Germany. So I do think we do need more specialist community musicians for orchestras and concert houses who really, as a professional musicians, reach out to the communities, not the musicians from the orchestra themselves if they have the experience, okay, they should do it, but mainly they have a job in the orchestras. So I do think we need special people like Matthew Robinson, who really, as a community musician, try to go out to the Turkish community, to the Polish, to the Russian, all the communities we have around in our cities, and bring the spirit of these communities back into the concert house. I think this is one of the future projects we should look for. And this is finally a very funny but very successful story. You see Duro Moll Klangkomplex Forte. This is not a real medicine, but it's a fake medicine, and it's, you know, it's sweet, and it's created from the Staatsphilharmonie Ludwigshafen. And the Staatsphilharmonie Ludwigshafen was during the pandemic on the marketplaces. So with a small group of musicians and the intendant went onto the marketplaces and spread this medicine. And it's called Musica Classica, symphony concerts, take it 5 times a year. So they distributed their subscription series in that way, in a very funny way. And what they invented was like a musical pharmacy. So they asked the people, not only in Ludwigshafen, but all over Germany via the internet, well, what is your music which you listen to when you are in love, or when you are tired, or when you are sick, and so on and so on. So they collected a huge bunch of musical proposals from the audiences and collected this and make something like a hit list. So which is the most impressive piece of music for love, or for if you're sick, or if you're tired, etc., etc. So it had a great impact during the lockdown to reach out with musical ideas. And you see, this is the Staatsphilharmonie Ludwigshafen, and you see the success. And this is the orchestra which got 51% plus of subscription during the pandemic. This is absolutely outstanding. And for me, the most convincing point that reaching out in persons, in chamber music, to the people in the space, in the city, is the key to unlock people to join you in the concert room. And finally, just be creative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerald, for this for these interesting examples. Reaching out is key. Very interesting. I would now give the floor to Anna Bull, please.
Hello, thank you so much for having me along to speak on this panel. So I'm a sociologist, previously a classical musician, a pianist. And I'm interested in questions of equality and diversity. So I'd like to discuss the question of impact on whom. And this is, of course, a huge challenge for a genre that I've argued is actually institutionalized. So the institutions are historically organized around excluding people rather than including them. So what do I mean by this? I mean that actually in the UK context, which is what I primarily studied, many of classical music's institutions were set up in the 19th century by the bourgeoisie, by the upper classes, and they were set up in order to exclude others and to provide a space for these groups. And the appeal was that they were exclusive. Now, this is a generalization. There was, of course, variation, but many of them were set up along these lines. And we've got to remember that the legacy of these histories remains with us. So we need to be examining this legacy in order to think about the impact of classical music today and whether some of these exclusions or ways of excluding people are still with us. And of course, Hannah has talked about this in relation to who gets to experience classical music, and these questions that we have been grappling with for years and years. So we do need to be asking impact for whom, and are people experiencing impact or classical music as intended, or are they experiencing it in unintended ways? There might be unintended consequences of classical music socially and culturally. It might in fact contribute to social divisions or exclusions, as well as even at the same time as having positive impacts. So how can we ensure when we're measuring impact and when we're studying impact as organizations that we're capturing both the positive and also the perhaps unintended negative impacts of any exclusions or social divisions? So I guess my suggestion for organizations who are thinking about how to capture impact, quite often I find there can be an emphasis on on trying to have scientific measures. And of course, you want to have robust tools for evaluation. But we've also got to combine these with critical sociocultural methodologies. And sociologists such as myself often, fair enough, we get criticized for pointing out what's not working, what's going wrong, rather than what's going right, or rather than coming up with positive ways forward. And yes, of course, that's fair. And sometimes we do tend to look on the negative side as well as the positive side. But I think it's important to remember that when we're trying to measure and evaluate impact, it's crucial to look at voices from the margins, to look at the voices who don't normally get heard. And so, if there's one principle that you take away from what I'm saying today, is to think about whose voice doesn't normally get heard, who's the perspective which is right on the margins, which is not in the center. A lot of the time that will be people of color, people from diverse gender identities, people from working class backgrounds who are normally expected to assimilate and do things in the normal way, So actually, just a quick plug, I'm working on an edited volume which will amplify these voices. So with Christina Scharf and Lauda Nushin, and this is called Voices for Change in the Classical Music Profession, which will be published later this year with Oxford University Press. And so one example is we've got an interview with a Black British classical musician who left classical music because of the racism he experienced. So we're trying to capture both the voices who are trying to make change in the center and the voices from the margins who don't normally get heard. So that's kind of the key point, thinking about how the legacies might exclude certain voices and finding ways to listen to those. But I think to build on what Hannah and Gerald have been saying, the other point I want to emphasize around impact is to think about the social and creative renewal of classical music and of the music itself. So I'm really excited to hear about the ideas that Hannah and Gerald have been talking about. I would like a one-to-one concert, please. So I think there are some great examples of how the music itself needs to change in order to enable people from different backgrounds to access it. So I'm sure we all agree that classical music needs to be a living, breathing art form. And if we're to change classical music to allow people from backgrounds who haven't traditionally been represented in classical music, the music itself needs to change as well. This needs to be a two-way dialogue between those of us who are curating the tradition of classical music and people coming in, bringing new ideas. And so the music and the social need to change alongside one another. And for me, similarly to what Hannah was talking about in relation to transdisciplinarity, which is a great way of thinking about it, for me this means more openness to and dialogue with other genres of music. It means musicians who are adaptable and can play across genres. Musicians who have creative as well as technical skills, so maybe who have skills in community music, and I would very much second Gerald's call for more community musicians in classical music institutions. So this means we have to think about what classical music is as a genre. What are its core values? What aspects are open to change and renewal? And I think many aspects of the genre that people love are not just the repertoire, but maybe the sense of intimacy that you can gain from this acoustic aesthetic, which would work well, really, which is maybe why the one-to-one concerts are taking off. Or maybe the spectacle of a huge orchestra playing together. So we can take these aspects of the experience, the essence of the genre, and think about how a more diverse set of musicians and audiences might offer creative ways for reinvigorating the music itself. But I think it's crucial to remember that changing the music itself doesn't necessarily lead to diversity. It has to be carefully thought out in order to ensure that you're changing music in ways that does open it up socially as well as creatively. And so, yeah,
I think
do I need to stop?
Yeah.
Okay, that was exactly where I got to. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this. Very interesting thoughts, a very different approach to impact that we had before. Our fourth speaker is Lucas Perron. Lucas, the floor is yours.
I unmute for now. So thank you so much. And we already heard so many wonderful things to be discussed further during our panel. And I'm very happy to come to present just after Anna Bill, because what I have to say is very much in connection to what she was saying. I personally did a research, PhD research in Kinshasa, in Congo, on social music projects. And when you do a research, you go look for other research done in this field. And to my astonishment, I found very little. Few years later, I did find I came across Jeffrey Baker's research on Sistema Venezuela. But then with a series of other researchers and practitioners, we decided in 2017 to create SIM, which stands for the social impact of music making, a platform, a network of researchers, especially researchers, but also practitioners developing social and community music projects, interested in developing and supporting research in this field, because to be able to develop the practice, we need to come to a better understanding, and that's what research is about: is to come to a better understanding of realities in terms of and in order to be able to enhance also the practice involving these realities. And so also I was myself interested in doing research in this field, because I was confronted with let's say an exaggerated rhetoric on music that could save all kinds of souls, and an exaggerated romantic rhetoric on all the things that music can do in terms of having in terms of social impacts. And so lately I found a name for this. It's in a way it's a form of sin washing, in sense that not all social projects are necessarily well developed, and but more and more are. And in terms of orchestras, I'm thinking then especially of Demos in France, but also nearby in Belgium we have the Antwerp Symphony Orchestra working with Paul Griffiths, and indeed Gerald, we need community artists who have such talent, and they exist, and they can be their talents can be welcomed in within orchestra projects wanting to connect to certain parts of the population which are not yet in connection with the classical music. I think the idea of transdisciplinarity is also very important, and considered to be more and more important in this practice, to be able to work as musicians with social and community workers, who are in good connection with parts of the population which are which we want to involve and welcome in social and community work. Yes, so there's so much to say, but the SIM research platform is organizing yearly symposia. This year we will be in London in December. We also organize seminars, 4-day seminars for scholars who come together and exchange their methodology and their research practice. And we just also recently made a publication in MCICM, the last MCICM of the end of last year. You can find a series of articles of researchers developing research in this field. So that's my 5 minutes are over.
Right. Thank you, Lucas. Thank you very much for this overview. Before we go to the discussion, I would shortly introduce you to a model that the Society of Dutch Symphony Orchestras have been working out. The question, unfortunately it's only in Dutch, but I will explain the most important parts of it. The idea behind this was that the activities of the orchestras, which is at the very center, have their intrinsic value, and this is where orchestras focus about. The traditional orchestra focus about playing the repertoire, finding an audience, and getting the finances done, to put it in a very short way. But we, for example, all know that when there is an orchestra in a city, it has an impact on the city. And starting from that, we said, how can we put that into a model? And the model is that the activities of an orchestra have different effects, and that those effects will have an impact on the region, on the society. That is basically the model. And welvaart is prosperity, economic wealth, and welzijn on the bottom is well-being. It's the subjective and collective feeling of well-being. So a couple of examples: if an orchestra does an activity, it leads to social gatherings. There is a shared experience. It might be pleasurable. Emotions are touched. It can be a model to be or a way to express yourself. You're inspired by it. Activities of the orchestra can also attract cultural tourism. It can trigger sales of other things. So think of hotels or restaurants or any kind of that. It can lead to a cultural diplomacy of a country or a region. City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra. Birmingham became much more known in Europe and the rest of the world also through the touring of their orchestra when they started with Simon Rattle. So the whole model is that activities have their intrinsic value, and the impact is basically between prosperity and well-being, and it can be collective and it can be individual. And what the Dutch orchestras at this moment do is that we try to find ways to measure this impact, the effects and the impact it has. And we do that together with two agencies that advise us, which is Bluejaard and Berenschot. And it's a group of people who have a scientific and economic, political background. And we have research, we have scientific research at the bottom of now getting a few examples researched, and it's all of the Dutch orchestras who take part in that research. So it includes the Royal Dutch Concertgebouworkest as well as the Metropole Orchestra or the Ballet Orchestra, or my orchestra, the Philharmonie Zuid-Nederland. And I just wanted to share that with you because I think it's at least one way to bring it into a picture. So, having said that, I'm quite curious to hear from the participants on the floor. We heard from Anna, the music itself has to change, which is quite a statement, I think. She also said, and I think she's quite right on this, that if we just commission new music in 2022 or 2023, it doesn't automatically mean that the sector, the classical music field, will become more inclusive. We have to think on the forehand what we have to do to commission a kind of work which actually makes sure that it can be inclusive. Anna, is that the right way I express it? My question to you on the floor is, do you know any projects which are actually going into this direction? And I would include those who are participants, whether there are any examples. I see one hand. I just have to see from, oh yeah, it's André Ullner, please.
Yes, thank you. I work for the Staatsphilharmonie Ludwigshafen here in the southwest of Germany. And about 2 years ago, we've started a project here with a cooperation with 2 institutions here in the area. The city of Ludwigshafen is right next to the city of Mannheim, and there is located the Oriental Music Institute, as well as an academy for pop music. And with the 2 institutions, we've started an ensemble of musicians from the orchestra, as well as local musicians that play maqam-based music, so-called Oriental music. And we've granted them an ongoing process of developing their own music without recurring to an already existing repertoire. And basically, what they started at was the same thing that Hannah Conway described. We threw them into the round and said, make music together. And the first thing they had to talk about was, what's the name of your instrument and how do you play it? And nonetheless, where can we go from there together? And in the second step, they had to negotiate rituals for rehearsals, rituals for writing music. There's no, they have no leader. It's a basisdemokratisch. It's everyone is equal. And so they have to do a lot of negotiation. They had to question own rituals of rehearsal. They had to question what is supposedly professional behavior, what is not professional behavior. And it has taken them about 2 years to now create an own repertoire and to also create an own understanding as an ensemble. And now they've come to the point where we can start sending them out to play concerts. And I think it's very important. And we've also seen this in other aspects. We've started a BPOC forum here at the Philharmonie to create spaces and create spaces that are not effective. And grant spaces to with their own speed, have groups give them space to develop. And a lot of times as cultural institutions, we think in effective ways, we think in measurable ways. And I think to reach people that we don't reach already, we have to overcome these views and make space also for other views, for other perspectives.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you very much. I was just thinking of, we had within the MCICM a project with which was called Empty Minds, and I see that Ferle Sprong is among the participants. Ferle, would you say that Empty Minds, in what we did and the second edition that is going to come, somehow fits into a change of repertoire thing?
You're putting me on the spot here,
yes,
Stefan. I think, and also if I listen to Anna just now, I think it's not necessarily about bringing in new repertoire in the sense of bringing in new composed pieces. I think that's one part of changing the music itself. But I think that especially maybe for everyone here, Empty Minds was an experimental project that Philharmonie Zuid-Nederland did in 2019 that I followed as ethnographer to see what is so difficult about changing the role of the audience. And it turned out that, and I'll speak about that in a session later, but it turned out that what's actually difficult about changing the role of innovation is that it's so intertwined with the aesthetic norms and the ideas about aesthetic quality that orchestras have built into their organization. So if you actually want to change the concert, if you actually want to give the audience another role, you will have to first change your own norms, your own ways of working, your own conventions, your own ideas about aesthetic quality. So in that sense, in the first Empty Minds experiment, I think that was more of a, we learned that was an issue. And now I think it's very courageous that Philharmonie Zuid-Nederland wants to do a 2.0. in which they want to try, because in the first experiment, in the end, I think the conventions and the norms were actually sort of put back to normal, because in the end, the conductor decided, in the end, the composer decided about the music itself. In the end, the audience did not have an artistic responsibility during the concert. But now, having learned about that, there will be a second experiment. And I think that's really also what it's about. It will be a process in which you have to learn, in which there's tiny changes that might enable this more reciprocal way of changing the practices. So if you want to change the role of the audience, the orchestra will also have to change. But how, we don't know. We'll have to figure out along the way. So in a way, yeah, I think especially this second experiment will offer the chance to maybe make this innovative process and this impact, if you will, reciprocal. And then in that sense, I think also aesthetically interesting, because things might shift in only just a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you, Ferle, for this. I'm sorry to come with that unexpected question. You will see, all of you will see Ferle later in a session, and she will talk more into details about doing artistic research with different publics. Hannah, one question to you. You are a composer as well. You are creating things. Is there anything within your line of work that sort of is in line with what Anna was suggesting?
You mean specifically involving audiences?
No, it's inclusive. So being inclusive in a way that the repertoire changes and the way you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that my work since I began, you know, since I started to work for the LSO in '99. You know, the reason that I started there was just before I started there, an Egyptian man. I've told this story before. Axel's going to be looking at the ceiling, but an Egyptian guy said to me on a train. I was traveling between Cairo and Aswan, which is a really, really long trip. Sorry, this is a tangent answer to your question, but I was traveling down through Egypt on a very long train ride as a very proud Cambridge University student back in the day. I was studying music, and he said to me, "What do you do?" And we had this very potted conversation in Arabic. And I said, I'm studying music, really proudly, Cambridge University. And he just laughed, like belly laughed at me. And I just thought, whoa, I don't really understand. And he said, when you can do nothing else in this country, you do music. And seriously, there's such a lesson in that, because music is music is music. And music is only music when it exists, when something is happening between two people or more people. Music doesn't exist by itself. And if you're just playing in a room to yourself, sure, there's sound, but is it really music? Is something really happening? It only really happens when two or more people get together, and that's when something special starts happening, or people start playing together or exchanging ideas, and transforming and becoming something new and something organic and living. So yeah, I can give 100 examples in my work of this, but I don't know that that's going to be useful to give you any one particular example. I think that you just need to recognize that, like Anna was saying, think about where the power is, and when you actually examine who has the power and who doesn't have power when you are making music, actually musicians are great at coming together and being very democratic and understanding and listening and knowing where people fit, and actually being very open and realizing that actually, if, like, for example, recently I've been sitting on the streets of central London writing songs with people who are homeless, and I've learned more about music doing that. I've learned new stuff about music and about myself as a musician, and about actually what and why we do what we do. And I see countless examples through the decades of my work of incredible, like, world-class musicians who you'd think have it all, know it all, have done it all, and say, only now I'm realizing I've learned more about music and what it is to be a musician having done this. So I think we can learn so much from opening ourselves to the rest of the world.
Thanks, Anna. Neil Smith has raised his hand. Maybe you say who you are before you.
Yes, I am Neil Smith. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the MCICM. There are a few questions in the chat also for people. So, Carol, there's a question about whether they're trying to patent or franchise the one-to-one concerts. And there's also a question from Anna Ramstedt about social responsibility. I'll get my question very quickly. I think it was Carol who said, talking about bringing the spirit of these communities back into the concert hall. And it just raised a little bit of a flag for me about why do they have to come to us? Can we go to them? And I think it plays into this conversation about sort of power, and whether we're trying to create new audiences for our classical music, or whether we're actually trying to meet people on a level and sort of see what we can learn from them and they can learn from us. It was just, I was wondering if people had any thoughts on that.
Anyone who would like to react? No, seems to be an open question, Neil. We won't solve it now. Gerald.
Well, I try to answer this question a little bit, because I think it's more about involvement. You know, we are very much thinking from our classical music making bubble as, okay, what should be good for the people and what should be on the program next year, etc., etc. But we don't involve the people who want to reach out, really. And I think this is another key, that we really, and this is what a community musician at least does. He goes out and he listens to the community, and he tries to bring together, bringing people together and bringing in their view of what should be meaningful to them. We always think, okay, this should be meaningful to you, but it isn't. So how do we change this practice? By involving potential audiences at least more. And you know, this is the old tricky question about audience development, etc., etc. But I think we are now on a different status than we are 20 years earlier, when we start with all the education project, etc., etc. So I think we are far much more advanced now, but we need a new view to get really the people who are interested in classical music, at least, or in music at all, to bring them nearer to us. And I think this is the tricky point. And there are so many recipes. There is not a one-fit-all solution, because it depends on if you are a local orchestra, or you have an opera house, or you have a concert house without any orchestra involved, etc., etc. So every institution has to find its unique way to reach out. And I think there are so many potentials which you only can answer for your special community. And this is different from Germany, Berlin, to London, or wherever in the world. And I think this is the tricky question, to find patterns at least. And what you described, Stefan, from the Dutch Orchestra Association, and I found it on the internet. So the presentation is completely on the internet. You'll find it. Is to look out, okay, which pattern will fit to my organization, then adapt it. I think this is the key, and we are thinking on these issues. And the last point about research, I think all those who are publicly funded institutions, and at least even those who are in a mixed funding, they need a documentation on the impact of the spent money. So politicians want to know, okay, this is a good investment into this arts form because there is an impact. And I think to transform this, not to utilize this arts, I think this is a very important point. The arts is not for getting people in the hall, bumps on seats. It's for, it's for developing personalities at least, and developing communities. And therefore, the part of, okay, how can we research, and how is the investment is one tiny part. It's an important part to get more money, even from private foundation as well from the public purse. And so there are many points which are important to make it measurable. What we had in the first presentation, to make, or a second presentation, I didn't remember quite. So make it measurable, but don't utilize arts to making a social repair garage, something like this. I think there are so many points which we have to tackle and which we have to discuss to come a step forward.
Thank you, Gerald. I see a question from Denise Petzold. Denise, would you like to ask them yourself? Yes, I think so.
Yeah, thank you. I just put in a comment because I wasn't sure the discussion was going on. But I wanted to react to something that Anna said. And I think the sort of change that we're talking about does not only concern the sort of repertoire that we, have, or decolonizing the repertoire, but decolonizing the repertoire also means thinking about these works that are already there and that we deem so important, and thinking about how you can make them artistically, socially, societally, culturally relevant in this process of decolonization. And I think what you ideally wouldn't want as an organization is to have this sort of very iconic repertoire that of course also grants a sort of economic stability, and I recognize that, and that's also of course a problem because that hinders the change that we might want. But what you wouldn't want is, I think, to have this sort of parallel existence where these repertoires never touch each other. So you have this sort of decolonized repertoire on the one hand, which still exists in a sort of shadow of the more iconic works that we don't necessarily dare to touch in the ways that we maybe should touch them. But maybe it's a bit of a controversial suggestion, but I've seen some people nodding.
Yeah, I mean, we have in Germany there is an Ensemble Stegreif Orchestra, and they do actually take some pieces of the iconic repertoire, Don Giovanni or Brahms III, if I'm not mistaken. And they mix it with improvisation and jazz and didgeridoo playing, and they dance to it. And the Brahms thing had a sort of salsa final based on a Brahms theme. So there are actually orchestras and new ensembles that touch even the iconic repertoire. And if I talk about it with colleagues from my field of work, I very often hear, I mean, this is all very funny, but it doesn't have the quality. And I then have the tendency to think, well, it's a different kind of quality. it has. It's not the same kind of quality, and then we fall back on what are orchestras these days and what do they stand for, and if they want to have a future, what do they have to change and what should stay the same. We have no more time. It's 11:59 and we have to stop. I think there is now a coffee break. Maybe Peter, you would like to take over from here?
Yes.
And before you do, I would like, from my point, thank everyone on the panel for their view, sharing their views. Everyone who asked questions had comment from the audience, and for all of you to take part in this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan, also for moderating this first roundtable. And well, at least for me, it clearly shows that the conversation has opened. There are so many things that already came up in this discussion, not only in the things that have been said, but also in the chat. That's one of the nice things about Zoom, is that you have this parallel world of people asking questions and making points in the chat. So also have a look at that. I'm happy with this. And
Geschäft ins Internet und verkaufe online mit Shopify.
Okay, so at 1 o'clock we will have two parallel sessions. One of them, as Vela already said, focusing on artful participation, which is one of the projects in the MCICM. So hope to see you all back at 1 o'clock, and thanks for participating.